Okay. Boker Tov and welcome. We have the privilege this Shabbat, well, number one, of holding davening in our shul on Shabbat morning for the first time since middle of March. So that is a major development. And number two, we're going to be reading two Parshios, because that's the way it's scheduled outside of Israel. The two Parshios of Chukat and Balak. I am only focusing this morning on the first of the two Parshiot. I'm going to tell you up front that there are 10 top stories in this Parsha, and here they are in the order that they're listed in the Parsha. Number one, the Parah Aduma, the red heifer. Definitely significant, a crucial part of the service and purification available through the Beit HaMikdash. Some reports of people in Israel and New Jersey who actually have a real, what appears to be real qualifying red heifers. So we're actually poised when the Beit HaMikdash is ready. We even have a couple of Parah Adumas that have been identified in the world. Next is the death of Miriam, which was a cause of, according to rabbinic and tradition, the next episode of a water shortage for the nation, which led to a crisis. That led to the fourth story of the actual hitting of the rock. And after the hitting of the rock, we have the first of four, but they're not all aligned, one right after the other, but the first of four encounters with neighboring countries. So the first of those four is with Edom. Those are the descendants of Esau. Moshe sends messengers, and he asks Jews to have right of passage without causing any damage through the land. Edom actually refuses. One could ask out of curiosity, had Esau himself been alive, and especially had Yaakov also been alive, Esau's brother, would Esau have refused us to pass through his kingdom? I think he might have let us, but his descendants did not. And because we have a hands-off policy with the land of Edom, they're entitled by God to their own inheritance. So Moshe backed away. He doesn't let us in, so we can't cross. We then have the account of the death of Aharon, the Kohen Gadol, which is followed by an aggressive attack by the Canaanite nation. They are defeated by our nation. That's followed by a complaint of no bread, no water, and the sending of the fiery serpents. And then Moshe sends messengers to Sichon, whose reaction to receiving messages from Moshe was to launch an attack, and they are defeated. And then the final story is the initiated attack by Og of the Amorite people and his defeat. So those are 10, maybe even 11 top stories in the Parsha. I'm going to focus on only one of those stories, and that is the story of the hitting of the rock. Mm-hmm. So, when the hitting of the rock is in its final couple of verses in this week's Parsha, it seems pretty clear from the Parsha that Hashem tells Moshe and Aaron that because of something that happened or didn't happen with this hitting the rock episode, they are not going to be leading the nation of Yisrael into the land of Israel. And it seems to be widely accepted that whatever sin Moshe committed is actually tied to this episode. However, what exactly the sin was is not as widely agreed. The Shaddai, who was an Italian Torah scholar living in the 19th century, 1800 to 1865 to be exact, if my source is accurate, he says that here we talk about Moshe having one sin, but there are so many different opinions as to what that sin was that in his day, he's looking at a list of 13 sins when the poor leader, poor Moshe saying, regret. So Moshe, made one mistake, at least one public mistake. There's only one public mistake, but there are 13 different opinions with 13 different mistakes listed as to what that one mistake is. So the Shadal says he's not even venturing into exploring this further, lest he himself come up with another suggestion and he doesn't want to add to the list. But I do want to share with you a few of the opinions. The most recognized explanation of what went wrong is that of the Midrash Tanchuma, which is quoted by Rashi. And that opinion states that God told Moshe, speak to the rock. I'll read you the opening verse from the story. God spoke to Moses saying, that's the introductory piece, and then, Kachatamateh, take the staff and assemble the nation, you and Aaron, your brother, and you in the plural, meaning Moshe and Aaron, should speak to the rock, identified in Hebrew as a selah, with an ayin at the end, not to be confused with the coin, that sounds the same, with a hay at the end, and speak to the rock, to their eyes and their presence, and it will give its water, and you shall bring forth water from the rock, and you shall provide drink for the congregation and for their flock. So that's the opening two verses, the one being the official introduction, God speaking to Moshe, and then the core of the command. So God commanded that Moshe and Aaron should speak to the rock. In the end, Moshe hits the rock actually twice. So it seems pretty straightforward that was a misstep. However, the Ramban, Nachmanides, actually challenges this explanation. He said that number one, God himself or herself, God commanded Moshe, Kach et hamateh. Those are the opening three words of the command. Take the staff. So the Ramban says, it was the same staff that Moshe used much earlier, shortly after we came out of Egypt and we were short of water. And there God told him directly, hit the rock. So the Ramban says that by God telling Moshe to take the staff, why did he need the staff if he wasn't going to hit the rock? Claims the Ramban, that since God told him to take the staff, that Moshe had a right to assume that he was to hit the rock this time, just as he did the last time. And furthermore, the Ramban says, we don't have all the details. It's not necessary to repeat things that should be so obvious and logical. So he doesn't feel that the Medrash Tanchuma is identifying the accurate mistake. Secondly, the Ramban states that what's the real difference? If you or I were standing, at in front of the shul, even though it's a little bit less accessible, and one of the rocks in the garden that somebody claimed that he could bring forth water from that rock, would it really make that much of a difference to us if he actually struck the rock and it produced water, or he just said, rock, please produce water, and it started to produce water? Is there that much of a difference? The Ramban, he says no. I mean, we could answer up those questions, but this is the development of the Ramban. So that's the second main question about the Tanchuma's viewpoint, is like, what's really the big difference between the two. And the Ramban refers to the Rambam, Maimonides. Maimonides sort of agrees with the Ramban that it's not what the Medrash says was the mistake. That far they agree. The Ramban says it was language and tone that Moshe used in speaking to the people, because before he produced the water from the stone, he among other words, he said to the nation, Shimuna Hamorim, listen to me, you rebellious people. The Rambam, Maimonides, is saying that here Moshe appears to be angry with the people. God wasn't angry with the people, but the Ramban will say. But Moshe appears to be angry when we don't have an indication really that God was angry. After all, the people complained about water and God told Moshe, give them water. So it seems that even though God's not always pleased with the complaints of the nation, but here in this particular case, God did say to Moshe, take action, take immediate action, and make sure you give the water to the nation. So the Ramban says is that it appears that God was sensitive. It appears that Moshe, didn't get angry, although the Rambam says he got angry and that made the people feel bad when God wasn't necessarily feeling that bad, so that was the mistake. The Ramban, so he's rejected the Medrash, he's rejected the proposition, again, for logic, what difference would it make? And he's rejected the Rambam, and then he comes and he gives his own view. And he says it's not really his own view, it's just that he sides with Rabbi Hananel, who said that the real problem in this episode is the phrase that comes right after Shimuna Hamorin, where Moshe says, Hamin hasela hazen notzi lachem mayim. Shall we produce water from this rock for you? What's wrong with that? If anybody wants to give a suggestion, unmute yourself. I'll give you a few seconds. What was wrong with saying, shall it be that from this rock we shall produce for you water? So Rabbi Hananel said the problem with that is one little letter in Hebrew, part of the conjugation representing the subject, and that's the nun, that stands for we, like from anachnu, the nun, notzi, shall we, that Moshe said, shall we produce water from this rock? He should have said, shall we see Hashem producing water from this rock, which is how the Torah records it earlier in the book of Shemot, in Parsha B'Shalach, with the first episode of Moshe, actually in Sefer Shemot, when the people are complaining, also in Parsha B'Shalach, about water, about food. And there Moshe speaks very clearly. One of the phrases that he uses, B'teit Hashem lachem, at the time that Hashem is going to give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to eat in the morning, bread, food, that Moshe indicates it's going to happen, and it's going to happen because God is going to make it happen. So Rabbi Hananel said that Moshe should have spoken about God being the agent, not about he and Aaron being the agent, and he identifies that as the error. Getting complicated. But the last thought and opinion that I'd like to share with you is actually based on the same source that the Rambam, that Maimonides focused on, that phrase of Hamin Hasela, where Moshe said, will we be able to produce water from this rock? There's at least one way of translating that. Is the same phrase could be understood in a different light. The Gemara in Megillah says that Kol ha'omer dava b'shem omro mevi gu'ula la'olam. That anyone who says something over in the name of the person who originally said it helps to bring redemption to the world. We learned that by Esther. When Mordechai learned of the assassination plot against Ahasuerus, he told it to Esther, and he told Esther to tell it to the king. Mordechai was interested in Esther, building her credibility, her importance, her reliability, her loyalty to the king. And he didn't want his name being mentioned, but nevertheless, Esther mentions Mordechai's name. And it's because of that, that when Haman wanted to execute the Mordechai, the king found that very, very unacceptable. And that's where the whole story starts to change. So you could bring. So what I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to tell you over in the name of Nechama Leibowitz, who in one of her study sheets to this Parsha indicated the following. It's not what Moshe said. It's not whether, it's not the fact that he said, Notzi, that we, can we bring water out of this rock? It's not even the fact that they were called rebellious people by Moshe. Because if so, as we could ask, is Moshe later on, we'll repeat that, when the nation is at the edge of entering the land of Israel, Moshe reminds them that they were rebellious. So if it was wrong the first time, shouldn't it be wrong the second time? So Nechama Leibowitz understands the Medrash Rabbah of actually teaching that it wasn't the words that Moshe spoke, it was the time that Moshe chose to speak them. The people were greatly disturbed. They were worried. They understood that their water supply, especially if we base ourselves on the Masorah provided by the Medrash, understanding that Miriam was the source of the bracha for having water with them all the time, and now Miriam had passed away. So where was this source of water going to come from? So it's understandable. It's not necessarily the best thing. I mean, we have a long history already in the desert. We've been eating the man for approximately 40 years. We've seen a lot of miracles in Egypt, out of Egypt. So you would think that maybe we should have been more trusting in Hashem, granted. But it also was understandable. It was a shortcoming, but it was a realistic concern, and it was a staple for survival. At that time, Moshe should have just given what the nation needed. Later on, when they would calm down, then Moshe can talk to them. Let's reflect on the situation. Was it really handled the right way? Let's not do these kind of things again in the future, whether or not I'm with you or not, Moshe could be saying to the people. And this we can understand from a teaching in Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar teaches, Al tiratzeh chavercha b'shat ka'aso. Do not try to calm down, to appease somebody at his moment of anger. Of course, it's a big mitzvah to help somebody calm down, which probably could lead to bringing shalom between people. But you have to know that as great as that value is, there are times when it can only lead to more explosion and not to calmness. So that timing is a very important thing. And that, according to Nechama Leibowitz, is the message of the Medrash in focusing on the phrase of rebuke, of Shimuna Hamorim. Listen, you rebellious people. It was the wrong time. People's ears and minds were not open to hearing it. It caused more friction. They needed the water. Moshe, basically, God was saying, according to this understanding, give them the water, let them see that they have it, that they will have it, let them calm down, and then you could debrief with them and help educate them to the more preferred course of action in this life. And that's a lesson that all of us can reflect on and probably either ourselves do even better than we're doing in that regard, or help other people to develop that same capacity and thereby promote effectively shalom between people, communities, and beyond. So I hope we'll all have a wonderful time reading the full Torah portions of Chukat and Balak this Shabbat. I'm going to unmute you now. Anybody still?
Hi, everyone.
Everybody's still muted. Is muted of your own personal selection. If you do have a question that you'd like to bring up, please do it now. Comment. You're welcome to share. Yes. Hi.
Hi. How can we fault Moshe? Moshe, he had so much service. He had such a responsibility. He had everything on his shoulders. He was a human being, but he was doing a superhuman job. I mean, how could we fault him?
Well, again, we'd have to be able to be confident we can identify the real fault, which obviously is not so easy because there are a lot of opinions. But the truth is the greater the person, the more righteous the person, the more Hashem expects of that person. And as the Rambam points out in his opinion, where he feels Moshe got angry, he feels that Moshe was an agent. We know he was the Shaliach of Hashem. He was the agent of Hashem.
Right.
And if Moshe was conveying anger, that meant to the people that God was angry. And the Rambam says that wasn't true, that God wasn't that angry with the people. We could argue whether he was disappointed, but he wasn't angry, and he did tell Moshe right away, solve the problem. So it was a mistake. Other people might answer your question saying it was a missed opportunity here. When God tells Moshe that he and Aaron that they're not going to be going in to the land of Israel, he says that they missed an opportunity to sanctify God's name. So even though the Ramban, Nachman, he said, what's the difference if you speak to a rock or you hit a rock? In the end, the rock is you giving out water to give drink to the entire nation. It sounds like a pretty big miracle one way or the other. But we could argue. We could argue that once you had that physical intervention to a people who have seen, a lot of miracles, having that physical intervention lessened the impact of it. The Malbim, in fact, says that a selah, you can even hear it. The rock that Moshe hit the first time in Parshas B'Shalach was a tsur with a tzadi. Like in English, we write a tzadi often with a T and a Z. It's a harder sound. A selah is with a samich. It's an S type of sound. It's a softer sound. The Malbim says that a selah is a softer rock, a more porous rock, and that sometimes these rocks would block a water supply. And being that they weren't as strong as a tsur, as a stone, if you hit this more porous rock, it is possible that you fracture it enough to allow this supply of water that's being blocked by it to come gushing forward, which means that Moshe did what he had to do, and it wasn't from God. So, there are things that we don't totally, understand, but we're supposed to do the best we can, and the more capable we are, the higher the standard God has for our behavior. And in some ways, I'll tell you very, very briefly, and then I have to go. I have a conference call in 2.5 minutes, is that I'm just blanking on the name of the sefer right now, but Michtav Me'Eliyahu brings down the fact that everybody has a nukudata b'chira, a point of free choice. In other words, there are some things in life that become easy for us, and we just can't keep on just flowing on what's already easy for us. We always have a challenge. Each and every person has a challenge in life. And once we reach what we think is our challenge, we have a new challenge. We always need to be going higher and higher. So even Moshe, in the end, he too is a human being. He still had left the world of having had a challenge that he did not yet meet.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Nice to see you. Nice to hear from all of you. Have a wonderful day. Have a beautiful Shabbos.
Have a beautiful Shabbos, Rabbi Esther. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're kind.
Thank you.
Okay. We both wish you
Thank you.
well. And
We wish you well, Rabbi. Thanks for
thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.